Join me in welcoming Dr. Cherie Hughes.
Thank you so much. I guess I'm the guinea pig. But I think we'll survive it. I'm very excited about this book. It's something that's been a long time in the making. It actually just came out late in November. And I think I started it in 2015. Now, that sounds like I was researching all that time, but another book intervened and got me off track. But I would suggest to Bob O'Brien that it's not made a comeback. He never went away. He never went away. But it was such a privilege to be looking into his life story, to be looking at the people that he converted, to be trying to understand his spirituality and how that undergirded everything that he did. I think the most important thing to think about when you think about Fulton Sheen is that he was a priest. First and foremost, he was a priest. Everything else followed from that. You think about what priests do, and one of the important things that they do is bring lost sheep into the fold. And there are times in his life when he was so busy he couldn't even bring lost sheep into the fold. So he was well grounded in his priesthood. I'm going to read a little bit about, I think I'm just reading from the first page here. And then the other thing I think you need to think about was that when Bishop Sheen came on the scene, first by radio in something called the Catholic Hour, he was on it for 20-some years. He then went on to a television show when television was brand new. So he was part of the golden age of radio and really part of the infancy of television. He never was at a loss for words. He loved people, he loved the Lord, he loved the Lord's mother, and by extension, all of his brothers and sisters in the world. But he was definitely situated in that era of the mid-1950s or mid-1900s. It was a time when Catholics, this may surprise some of you, if you're young, it may surprise you to find out that Catholics were not very well thought of in the United States. They were looked upon as somebody who was alien, somebody who was not really a patriarch here, did not follow the President of the United States but the Pope in Rome, and they were certain that as the Catholics got themselves organized, and they have a genius for getting organized, they got so well organized that it made the majority population really nervous. So when the minority group gets confident and excited, the majority group goes, I think there's something wrong with this picture. So he was fighting against, that aspect of American culture. And part of his marching orders, if you will, for his position on the radio and later on television, all had to do with making Catholicism less foreign seeming, making it seem benign, as possibly even something good. He always thought that Christianity is important to the world. And I think we see that today. It talks about the secularism that came out of sort of the post-war years into the middle to late 1900s. He was a warrior against communism. He saw that communism was anti-God, and he said any institution or any civilization that becomes anti-God, it begins to fail, and it fails from the inside. He said, the church can get along without anything, but a democracy needs the church. Otherwise, there's no no guidance. As soon as you take God out of the central square and relegate him to a personal God, that's not part of the larger group, then there's room for secularization and room for tyranny. And I think we've seen that in many of the communist countries around the world. So let me just read something here. This is from the very beginning. Seeing Fulton Sheen on television was an unforgettable encounter with a remarkable individual. In person, he must have been even more riveting. He was a good-looking man, not Hollywood handsome, but striking nonetheless. It was his eyes that captured first one's attention. His arresting and deeply set blue eyes were steely and direct with a certain twinkle in them, as if he had an important secret to share with his audience, which of course he did. Bill Osterlund, who met him in Council Bluffs, Iowa in 1974, said, looking at Sheen was like looking into the eyes of God. Then there was Sheen's distinctive voice. He spoke with a precise accent that was impossible to place. It was his very own accent, influenced, no doubt, about the years spent abroad and with a facility with many different languages. He was always impeccably dressed in the ecclesial garb of his rank in the Roman Catholic Church. He was a priest, a Monsignor, then a bishop, and finally an Archbishop. As a Monsignor, he wore a black cassock with piping of aromat, a rose red with aromat buttons and a sash in his waist. When he became a bishop, he added the violet zucchetto, which he often referred to as his beanie. In his voluminous ferriola, his long cape that tied to the neck, became violet, and of course he wore the bishop's gold or silver pectoral cross. He was an impressive sight, the likes of which most of his television audiences would never have seen and never would see anyplace else. With his eyes, his voice, and attire, it was impossible to realize that he was a slight man of short stature. He was less than 5'8" inches tall. Maybe on a good day, he might have made 5'8". He usually was under 130 pounds, but his physical proportions were inverse to the enormous influence he wielded for mid-century Americans of all religions or none. Time magazine would put him on its cover. The Television Academy would recognize him with an Emmy for the best personality in the year 1952. Now that's pretty remarkable. When he finally went on television, they put him on what was called the obituary slot because he was opposite Milton Berle and Frank Sinatra. Okay. Two really huge, well-known entertainers. And then out comes this guy in a skirt. Anyway, it was just remarkable, the things that he did, things that he saw along the way. When he was giving his talks on television, there's a tightrope that has to be walked. You have to be the expert, right? You have to be the expert. But if you're the expert with a capital E with an exclamation point in the back of that, it makes you seem like you're condescending to your audience. So you can't do that. So he intuitively would go to something that was common to most people. And he usually opened with a joke, usually with himself the butt of the joke. But he would work humor into his shtick, if you will. And here he was giving a talk on his show, Life is Worth Living. And he was saying to the people, when we enter the kingdom of heaven, the surprise will be threefold. First, we are going to see a number of people there whom we never expected to see. The second surprise will be not seeing a number of the nice people whom we expected to see. But these surprises will be mild compared to the third and greatest surprise of all, and that's the surprise will be that we are there. So he didn't really consider himself to be a comedian, but it's amazing that people like Jackie Gleason, Milton Berle, and others just who were comedians thought he was highly, highly, highly polished in the comedic stance. There are lots of pictures of him, by the way. I think if you're going to do a biography, you have to have lots of pictures. So that was kind of a challenge, but we managed that one. So I said he got the Emmy Award, and you have to go up and pick up your statue. And usually people say, I need to thank my director, I need to thank the writers, I need to thank my mother, my third grade teacher, all those kinds of things. And he got up, and he said, I have excellent writers. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So that's very sweet. The subtitle of the book is Convert Makers, and he was thought to have made, at least by his postulator, 42,000 converts. One of the things about that is those are the ones we know about. Think of the ones we don't know about. People who were listening to this program, who were convinced of the right cause of the Catholic Church, and who, because they listened to Sheen, they sought out their local priest and became converted. So we don't know. We have to go 42,000 plus. It is converting people, absolutely. We had, sometime back, we had Patrick Coffin here during the 2015 or 2014 anniversary of the cathedral. And he gave his talk, and he said that he had been converted because of the radio. It's really amazing. Now, whether he's listening to Bishop Sheen or not, I suspect that a lot of people today in this area, at least, are listening to Bishop Barron, right? Going to hit that ball right out of the ballpark with Bishop Barron. Or you're going to have Father John Ricardo, who makes so much sense and who's so compelling. I would suggest that you look him up. But one of the things he told his converts, and one of the things that he wanted everybody to know about, and this kind of picks up from Vatican II, there's no limits to the truth you can know, to the life you can live, to the love you can enjoy, and to the beauty you can experience once you're converted. If you're oriented to God, everything else follows. And I think that's such a beautiful thought there. I would be happy to answer a couple of questions if you have them. Yeah.
I was just interested. Today we see an awful lot of church on television. The industry seems to have discovered that, and everybody's using it. But I'm wondering, I saw my first TV in 1952 and 1953, and I was wondering how the TV industry brought you in and stick.
Would you repeat the question?
Yes, the question had to do with the change in technology and how television promoted him and then maybe abandoned him. I will say, and I say it in the book, that it wasn't Bishop Sheen that changed, it was society. That post-television, it was never actually post-television, and it was pulled off of television, by the way, because Bishop or Cardinal Spellman was in a peak. So you'll have to figure out what all that is, and I will tell you that. But he was asked to do many things, and he did them right until the end. So he really did use the medium quite well. But I think it wouldn't be as popular today because of the way he presented things. But you remember, this is a guy who came of age in the 1920s and 30s and 40s. And so what worked then, people on television or on radio tried to be very dramatic, like stage actors. You know, we go to a theater to see a play, and the people make exaggerated arm movements and move their bodies in different ways. And that's because the person in the last row has got to be able to see them. So his way of rhetoric, I don't think would be bad. I just think that society has changed so much, it'd be hard to imagine. Another question? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering, can you tell us just a little bit? I know that he suffered terrible over the communication with the cardinal, who accused him of mismanaging the money.
Yes.
Can you?
Sure. Cardinal Spellman had been the president of the, or director of the Society for the Propagation of the Faith, which is actually the arm of the Catholic Church that gives to foreign missions. And he wanted to get out of that, and he put Bishop Sheen in that particular spot. And so he collected millions of dollars for the missions, for foreign missions. Well, at one point, the cardinal wanted some of that money to go to the post-war development in Europe. He said he was afraid that the Catholic Church would lose out to the Protestants who were over there giving out money, you know, hand over fist. And Bishop said, this money that we raise is for the missions. It's not to rebuild Europe. And no, you can't have it. Well, Bishop Spellman is not somebody who said no to. He didn't take that very kindly. So he had a bunch of people come and visit him and try to talk him out of it. He even had Joe Kennedy, the father of President Kennedy, to go and talk to Sheen to see if he could talk him out of some of that money. He said, no, people are sending this in for the missions. They're not sending it in for Europe. So eventually he said, he even said, I don't even know I mentioned this in the book, but he sent private detectives after him to try to find out if he had done something naughty that he could embarrass him with. They couldn't find anything. He was, squeaky clean. So then the cardinal went to the Pope. And guess what happened? The Pope sided with Sheen. Okay. That was, he was not a happy camper with that. There followed, a couple of years later, another incident of the same thing, when Bishop Sheen was presented a bill for milk money given to the missions by the U.S. government. And Sheen said, well, there's no bill for this. This became gratis from the federal government. So, then again, more people trotted up to try to convince him, and then he Spellman went back to the Pope, and the Pope again sided with Bishop Sheen, because he could prove that they had not spent any money buying that milk. It had come gratis from the federal government. Well, that's 2 strikes against you. And Spellman was a very powerful man. He was probably the most powerful prelate at the time in the United States. And he said, I'm going to get even with you, even if it takes 10 years. And so in the reading of the book, I think you will find that he got even with him by sending him to Rochester.
Took him down from Archbishop to just Bishop.
No. He became an archbishop after he left, Rochester. So he was a bishop in the early 50s, because I think he thought that a bishop would make more sense being the head of the propagation of the faith here and raising the money, he would have more stature asking for it. It wasn't that Rochester was so bad, it was that Bishop Sheen really wasn't much of an administrator. He didn't really quite understand how dioceses worked. He had really only spent about 8 months of his life as an assistant pastor in a church, so there he stayed in the rectory, but that was his only experience with that. So he got up to Rochester, New York, following Vatican II, and he wanted to do what Vatican II thought we should be doing and opening it up to the public. And one thing or another, and his downfall was really trying to give away a parish and school that basically was teetering on the edge of failing because of the people who had moved away. And so he arranged to have it given away. But guess what? He forgot to tell the pastor. Giving away your church. So people were absolutely astounded and upset and angry, as you can imagine that they might be. So it was could have been a fit of pique on Spellman's behalf. I'm not sure he could have exactly figured out that Rochester would have occurred in the same way, but that was getting even. So it was a difficult time. Donna?
Cherie, I was wondering, it seemed like Bishop Sheen understood, looking ahead to the times we're in now, how much we were going to need to be understood psychologically. He seemed almost like a doctor. I just wondered.
I think he had great insight into people.
Could you repeat it, Cherie?
Sort of like a doctor that he was looking into the future from various people, looking to the future. I'll give you an example is looking to the future. In his later years, he really gave a lot of retreats to seminarians, and those retreats were arduous. He gave several talks a day and so to speak the whole time. This one he's like 97 years old, or late 80s, I think. And he would go afterwards to the abbot or to the whoever was in charge of the seminary and said, that young man who was sitting in the front row, he's going to leave. He's going to desert out. How did he know that? He did that several times. It's just something about the individual that he intuited just from his being there.
I think that was my dad. Because he was there. And he is out, obviously, down here.
Yeah. Oh, good. Anybody else back there? I guess.
I missed out on a lot of him because I wasn't in the church when he was. But I would listen to political radio as a young adult, and it seemed like there were disparaging comments that have been often on political radio. What was his, just in general? I mean, I know he was popular, but in terms of politics, people in politics, did he have a reputation per se? Or
He said he was apolitical. He said, I'm a priest. I'm not a Democrat or Republican. I'm a priest. So he did not adhere to any of that. I mean, even though he was very early anti-communist, he never got involved with the House of Un-American Activities or any of those kinds of things that came about in the early 50s, which is not his era. I will say that he had a way of being intimate with people. He would begin his audience talk, thank you for inviting me to your home tonight, or so nice of you all to come today. the other day I saw a little boy and he did this and he did that. And he said he got a letter from a little Jewish boy and said, my father won't let me wear a yarmulke because he says I'm too young. But I said to my dad, but Bishop Sheen wears one. And the little boy actually wrote a letter to Sheen and took his beanie and sent it to him. And a couple of weeks later, there was a photograph in the Pittsburgh newspaper of a little beanie on this little boy. It was very sweet. I mean, he connected with people in just real, genuine ways. So he was a personality to be contended with. Absolutely.
Well, I think the fact that he was still being discussed politically, things that he would say, that had said, decades before, it was still being talked about.
Right.
And I was just like, who is this Fulton J?
Well, and I think it was in the year, I think it was in 2000 or early 2000s, they did a poll of who recognized these people. Well, everybody recognized John Paul II, everybody recognized Mother Teresa, everybody recognized Padre Pio, and the fourth person highest on that list was Bishop Sheen. 20 years after he already died. So it's quite remarkable. Right?
I have a question about your process as a writer. When you get a new idea, how do you start? I mean, the life of Sheen, that's a huge topic.
You lie down. You lie down to the feet and passes. This book came together because I was looking at converts. I was interested in converts. I'm a Catholic convert, Bill's a convert. I'm sure there are other converts in the room, and when I found out that he had converted so many celebrities, I thought, this is something interesting. People might want to know about him. So I tried various angles, coming at Sheen from a number of angles, and the one that seemed to prove the most fruitful was the converts, as the convert maker. Though, even though that's the subtitle of the book, he would not have liked that because he said, I'm not a convert maker. I don't make the converts. The Holy Spirit makes the converts. I'm just the greeter at the door.
Did you have a favorite convert story? Did you have a favorite one, or were they all just great?
They're all just fascinating for their own reasons. I think the first one that I talk about in the book is a black lady who had owned saloons. She called herself a saloon keeper, really what they were nightclubs. Notably in Paris between the World War I and World War II. And she was just such an incredible character. I was fascinated by her and all the people that she knew. Her nightclub was so popular that that Woody Allen movie that takes place in around midnight or something like that, there's a line in there that says, let's go to Bricktops. So it was very popular. There were many expatriate Americans who were there. It was kind of an interesting insight into the world of those people. She evidently taught King Farouk how to do the Charleston. Anyway, she led a very not so chaste life, and when she was converted to Catholicism, again, hers was a radio conversion. She listened to Bishop Sheen on the radio, and then after a while sought out a Catholic priest. And she said of her life after her conversion, she said, I never found happiness, but now I have happiness in just living. And if you have your eye on God, and that's where your focus is, the happiness will follow. So, thank you all very much for coming today.